So thanks everyone for joining us. Today I have Mike Way, coach of the Harvard squash team, a legend among legends, although he'll never admit it. I wanted to get Mike on here, talk a little bit about some of his history, talk a bit about coaching and the experience that he's had with Jonathan Power, with a lot of other high-level players, as well as obviously his experience as a coach now at Harvard and his playing experience. He was a top-level player himself. So Mike and I met, how long has it been, Mike? Like 20 years now, I think.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah, 20 years. And it was funny. I started playing squash a bit later in my life as a teenager. My parents reached out to Mike one day. I think it was my mom that maybe reached out to you because they saw that I had a keen interest in the game and you were kind enough to say, hey, bring him over and I'll take a quick look at him. And that's kind of how it started. And it just sort of flourished from there. And Mike's been super supportive all along and I really appreciate it. So thanks for being here, Mike.
Yeah, no, I forgot about that. I forgot it was your mum. So my best to your folks.
Yeah.
One correction there. You said, former top player. No, former player struggling to be a top player, but never making it. Anyway.
How far did you get? You got to what? The 50s?
Not that far.
Well, you got pretty
I'm a better
far.
coach. I'm a much better coach, I hope, than I ever was as a player. But that's the funny thing. You look back on those days and it's almost, there's so many coaches I've spoken to about this very thing. It's almost like the mistakes that you made yourself really help you in ensuring that you don't have the young players in your group not fall into the same trap. So I think you learn, you may not realize, you might have scratched that itch or realize your full potential or do what you want to do. But do I think it helps you and helps guide you as a coach? Yeah, I think it does. So all the mistakes, I look back on all the mistakes I made, which were probably too many to list, really helped for me as a coach, to be honest.
That's awesome. Well, I have a question for you based on what you just said. Do you think then, because you said your experience has helped as a player, has also helped you become a better coach and guide people in more effective ways. Do you think it's essential for a good player to have played, a good coach to have played at a pretty good standard as a player themselves? Or do you think you can become a really, really good coach without having been a player of a certain standard?
I don't think you have to be a good player or have been a good player or a competitive player to be a good coach. But I do think that you're going to be much more effective when it comes to the mental side. So, I just think that, your own demons that you experienced as a young player. So I think when you competed at a reasonable level, and you were dealing with the same things because it's all relative. As long as you went through that experience, I think it will make you much more effective and you understand more what the individual is going through. You understand their struggle. Right. And you can talk that language a little better. Right. If you were talking about it from a purely, say, technical, the basics, getting a kid to sort of or a club player to a reasonable level, technically and tactically, you could argue that maybe you don't need them. But I do think it helps having been in the trenches. Again, it's all relative, having been in the trenches and having struggled yourself. But as long as you moved forwards with that struggle, whether it's after your competitive days, so whether it's through reflection or during, but you're able to get something out of that, it's definitely going to make you more effective. That'd be my belief.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think in my mind, the thought that was coming was you have to be of a certain, depending on the standard of player that you're trying to develop, the level of experience has to be somewhat correlated. I feel. I think someone would be very hard pressed to develop a top 10 or 20 player in the world, having never played at a somewhat competitive standard themselves, to be able to understand and interpret those sorts of things.
The other thing that feeds into that is that, if you don't understand it to a certain degree, you can't talk their language.
Right.
And you just won't, you'll lose the player. So it's like when you get less experienced coaches, when they're preparing athletes or they're talking to them between games and they're clearly they're not connecting.
Right.
So for whatever reason, now, it might be other things why they're not connecting. But if you don't connect because you don't understand tactically what's just happened or what needs to happen, what the game plan is, and you really can't talk it in those terms, in their language. So less experienced coaches, you know, they might over talk. They might, to compensate, they will over deliver the message. And in so doing, as they rabbit on, they lose the player.
Right. Is there a particular strategy you use? Like you try to give one positive reinforcement sort of comment, maybe one constructive area to focus on, or do you not have any sort of plan in that sense?
Are you talking about between games?
Yeah, maybe between games.
Yeah, between games, I don't always follow the same routine, but I generally do. The first thing I do is I don't jump in. I make sure there's a good block of time. You know, I probably learned to do that more effectively with Jonathan, just because he needed that blocker. He liked space, physical space, and he liked a space of time to regroup. Sometimes it was because he was just venting.
Right.
So I always give nearly every player, I give them space, let them have a drink, calm down. Then the routine, I never thought about it. Do I have a routine? But as I reflect now, I generally ask them, what do they think they need to do? Right. So I'll always comment when something's going well. And usually I'm going to look for one or two positives there, but you can't always do that. Sometimes when someone's really played poorly, they know that. And again, looking as we reflect on a less experienced coach, they might be looking to compliment and over compliment, where you can lose an athlete if you say, hey, you know, this was really good, that was good, when in fact it was a bag of dirt. You're going to have cred factor. You're going to lose them. So generally, I would ask them what they think. And then hopefully I'm going to agree with them on 1, 2, or 3 points. I'll never go with more than 3 points. I'll make sure that I reiterate, or I give if there's a disagreement, I might make suggestions. Then I have them feed it back to me, and then I'm going to try and summarize it with single words or phrases. And I definitely don't try and I do not rabbit on and on. So I pick my 1, 2, or 3 things max. I make sure that they're saying it. If there's agreement, I'm going to repeat it, and then I'm going to do a summary. And then the most important point right before they go back on, excuse me, right before they go back on the court, there might be one really powerful thing that I want to reiterate overall, and I might just say that. The other thing that I'm going to make sure I do, if it's a stressful encounter and they're struggling, I'm going to address the mental before the tactical. Mental must come first to allow for clarity of thought. So if it's just tactical, and you can see that the player is not settled. So if they had a game plan going in and they're not even close to executing the game plan, because there's a lot of distress, a mental distress, then you have to, in my opinion, you have to address that first. So I have to do something to calm them down, to bring some clarity, and then tactical instructions. It just can't be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tactical. It can't be that. It's just not going to work. And then you have to gauge on the side. You know, have you got the type of player that you're having to calm down, or move them, shift sideways, or which is less common, but get them up. But sometimes you do. Sometimes you gotta, you have to help them find a fight inside. To get it. You have to help them find an edge, and you really have to know your athletes well to know how to talk to them, and it's very tonal. So yeah, when I think back, to the Jonathan Graham writing Shahir Razik, you're not going to get peed off with Jonathan, and you're going to be very matter of fact with Graham, but with Shahir, you sometimes want to hit him with a 2x4. Okay. And to work.
Right.
Obviously I'm talking metaphorically there. That'll be a good scene.
Well,
But
I'll have to ask him afterwards.
Yeah. But getting to help him find a little bit of a fighting spirit used to really help Shahir.
Right.
And the coaches have to be creative. So he's, that might be less common, but right. You have to have tools in your bag of tricks. You can't do the same thing every time and have fake anger to try and get a player up. There has to be something, legitimate and real that's happening that you can use. But yeah, was it effective? Yeah, it was very effective. Jonathan was very effective at getting Shahir to play better squash, because Jonathan would always would be, he wouldn't hold back. Jonathan's never held back on anything. And he would be, I felt Jonathan was very good for Shahir, actually.
Interesting. Okay, I'm not going to dive too much deeper into that because I wanted to ask you a few other questions. There are some things that popped up. Maybe we'll save those for another discussion. I did want to ask you a fun question that I think a lot of people, it's an age-old debate that never gets old. You've shared some fun stories with me over the years about either having played Jansher or seen Jansher and Jahangir and stuff like that. First, tell me one funny story that you've experienced that just exemplifies their standard.
Well, I mean, if it's in relation to me, I mean, I was lucky to play them each once. And of course I was annihilated, but when Jansher, I remember waiting to go on the court against Jansher, and the tournament director came over. We're waiting to be announced onto the court, and the tournament director came over and said, "Oh, Jansher, will you be wanting dinner after the match?" And he said, "Yes." "Why are you asking?" He said, "Because the kitchen's going to close in 25 minutes. And I remember standing there just going, "No." And of course, you could imagine where his mindset was. His mindset wasn't worried about Mike Way. His mindset was about, "Oh, I need to be on and off the court here to make the post-match dinner," which he did in double quick time. But anyway, so.
And what year was this, Mike?
Oh my goodness me, I can't remember that. It had to have been late 80s. Yeah, had to have been in the 80s somewhere, late 80s somewhere. I can't remember the exact year. But I mean, I was delighted. I had to win the qualifier to get in,
right? Which
I did. And then the first year I met Jahangir, and when I played Jahangir, that was in international scoring, which is even tougher. And I remember winning a rally. I was about 7-love down, winning a rally, and then serving out, and the crowd going crazy. I mean, just think about that. Talk about embarrassment on top of embarrassment. But anyway, he was very gracious. And kind to me. But yeah, those two, I mean, the two best players ever in the history of our sport. So,
well, actually, that last comment you made, I wanted to ask you, people are always wondering, okay, who's better? Are the modern players better? Are those guys better? And there's obviously no way to tell, because you can't get them at their peaks and primes at the same time on a court together. Technology was different, training was different, the scoring was different, everything was different. You've had the fortune of actually playing those guys firsthand. You've coached guys like Jonathan, and you're around the modern game to some extent now as well. What do you think? Like, is there a way to say who's better, or are there certain characteristics or traits that you would say would make Jahangir and Jansher just as competitive? Maybe not 10 British Opens in a row dominant, or do you think that's even possible?
Well, the one thing, look, there's two statements that are really obvious, right? The way they played versus the way the game is played today, it would not be a match. And that's, of course, the same true of tennis. But if they were around today, when you look at them technically and how they moved and so on, would they be at the top? Yes, they'd be at the top.
Right.
So it's hard, and the game when those guys were at the top there, the they overlapped with Jeff Hunt.
Yes.
And you think of the guys in Jeff Hunt's era, Hidi Jahan, Mohibullah Khan, Kamal Zaman, Gogi Alaud, and then Chris Dittmar, and they're overlapping with Rod Martin and so on, Rod Isles. You think of all those great players. It's not that, some people would argue there's more depth now. There were eras where there was great depth and great players then. I don't think, to me, it's one of those arguments. I don't even know why the discussion really people get so excited about it.
Right.
It's clearly that style couldn't compete with the style today.
Yeah.
But would those players be at the top? Yes, they would be at the top.
Right.
And why would they be at the top? Not just because of how they hit the ball technically, but because where they were mentally.
Right.
So those players I just listed, and many, many others, of course. I'm going to forget Jonah Barrington,
right,
who started the whole thing. But when you think of all those great players over the years, what differentiated them from their peers in many ways was their approach mentally game. And the fact is that would they be as determined and as tough and clear-minded with a phenomenal work ethic today? Yes, they would. There's no question in my mind. Those guys, any of those guys, will be at the top. But it's pretty hard to say that someone in the modern era is or could go down in the history of our sport better than, say, Jahangir, Jansher, Jeff Hunt. Pretty tough to make those sort of statements when you look at their record.
Yeah, I think it's the record piece is the key, like not dropping a match for 555 consecutive matches, like over 5, like that sort of stuff. You just don't hear or see that happening at all now. And there could be many reasons for that, but no, that's helpful. I was curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about getting a little bit more into the mental side, but first kind of a high level mental question. There's so much talk about personal development nowadays. Our experiences, the history, the things that happen in our lives create these narratives and patterns, and they dictate our behavior and stuff. Number one, I guess, what are your thoughts on that general notion? I'm assuming you agree with all of that. And then how do you think that if that plays out in people's squash?
You're talking about, sorry, so you mean how does their personal development?
Yeah, like how do people's experiences impact their squash? So experiences could be traumatic things that happen early in their lives. Do you think those sorts of, like losing a match when they were a kid or being coached the wrong way when they were a kid, how do you think those sorts of things end up playing out? And do you think it's easy or difficult to maybe rewire some of the default patterns that get created from those sorts of experiences?
Well, that's a heck of a question. I don't know. I'm not sure. I just think it's so individual. But yeah, overall, I would say that any experience that a kid has when they're younger, and when they've dealt with adversity, no matter what it was, and they've come through it, is going to help them in the long. But when you throw things in like the technical component, I mean, if a kid hasn't learned to hit the ball correctly, or they develop an aspect of their game much later in their career. You and I last week were talking about Paul Coll, and he's just beaten Ali Farag, and fantastic for him, well deserved, and fantastic for the game, but might you look back and say, well, because his short game and his tactical awareness seems to come up in the last little while. So you could say, well, he had to deal with that adversity because he went in with a limited game. So he competed against the best guys in the world. He competed with a limited game, and that built a resilience and a determination. But what you'll never know is, imagine if he was turning the clock back a few years, and he developed his short game and his tactical awareness sooner, or there was a technical aspect. So, these are things that you just, you put your palms to the ceiling, you can't really answer them. The one thing I will say is, which comes down really to character, and I noticed this at Harvard a lot, and that is really to do with how the kid has been brought up, and their level of respect, and really what their character is like, will determine their coachability. So if there is a fragility in a young person, in a player, and they can't take the feedback very well, it will take them longer, takes the coach longer, and take that athlete longer to realize their potential. And it's quite stark here at Harvard. It's quite obvious, and especially over the 11 years I've been here, as to looking at those guys that were resistant to feedback. I'm not talking about whether they're a good kid or a bad kid. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about that struggles. So they put a bit of a masquerade on to show toughness. Right. Okay. And that toughness may manifest itself in what absolute detrimental to their development. So right before this Zoom meeting, I sat down, got into the office early, and I was watching Victor Crouin. He just won a tournament. So I'm watching Victor play, and looking at all things and what he has evolved and developed in the few he's been here. And of course, he's helped with, he gets on court with Thierry Lankou, and his dad's a coach. So I'm not talking about what we've been able to how we've been able to help him here, we three coaches. But I'm just using him as an example of a young man of terrific character, and an openness and a willingness and a desire actually to get the feedback. Here are my matches from the weekend. Let's go over them. Often we watch his matches together. Today we weren't able to. If he had lost the match, we absolutely would have. Or if it was a very tough match, it was 3-love. It was fairly straightforward, except the first half of the first two games. The fact that he's really able to look, whether it's a technical or a tactical thing, and the character of Victor as a good example to other young athletes is helping him and will forever help him to develop his game so that he can realize his potential. So if there are those that struggle in that regard, then it can be a slog. It can be a slog for the coach, and you feel as if you're on the sidelines waiting for those perfect moments where you can dig a little deeper into their game. It can be very frustrating for the coach. It goes with the territory. We've got 30 student athletes here. It goes to the charity. Not everyone is going to sit down willingly and openly. And if they've had a bad loss and they're emotional and they're upset, or there's something, if it's a challenge match with a teammate and there's a relationship issue or whatever. But in summary, good character, good character skills, I would say. Let's use it that way. Good character skills help them develop more quickly.
And actually, for any parents out there, and I'm going to be a little bit selfish since I have a young daughter at home as I grow up, some of these character traits over the years, have you developed a deep enough relationship with any of your student athletes to try and discern what allowed them to develop these strong character traits versus maybe challenging character traits to be coachable? Are there certain things that you discovered that parents did, and there's a common theme that when parents did this, it led to the kid being more standoffish, not as open to feedback, et cetera, and then when parents had this sort of an approach, they were more coachable, more relentless, willing to learn, et cetera?
I honestly, you need to speak to a family psychologist to get honest feedback there, but there's no question that there's some bad parenting out there. And I mean, it might be accidental bad parenting. But I think overall, the behavior of parents has got better. But there's no question that the kids that are brought up with more independence and less of this, what they call them, the helicopter parents. When the parents are less involved overall, I would say that helps the kid much more. Now, that's a hell of a generalization, and I'm absolutely not qualified.
Of course.
I'm not qualified to make broad statements beyond maybe that as an observation.
Precisely.
Okay, so when I'm getting parents, even now with college kids, or I'm getting parents emailing me about their kid, I'm not talking about a kid that's struggling in life.
Right.
There should be good communication between the coach and the parents to help them navigate, and some logistical stuff, and especially if there's a struggle, so the coach understands the background stuff.
Right.
But the over-involved parent is absolutely not helpful.
Right.
And not helpful to the kids' development as a young athlete, and just not helpful to their development as a young person. And it's a massive sweeping statement, and I should stop right there before I get myself in trouble.
No, that's fair. And I think the theme you're describing is autonomy. When we don't give someone autonomy, then I've read some research from psychologists about autonomy and the correlation with autonomy and intrinsic motivation. And I feel like the helicopter parenting style, you take away the autonomy, the kid becomes dependent on you. They're always looking for some form of extrinsic motivator, and that inner fuel and fire and drive isn't there. And a lot of the things you mentioned, I feel, around the desire to learn and improve and ask questions and seek feedback, well, all of a sudden that becomes a threat to your ego. It becomes a threat to your self-image when you've kind of been raised in a certain way. And that's, again, no fault of their own. And it might not be, actually, I don't think it's ever the fault of the parent, because I feel the parent is always doing what they think is best and what they know to be best. And maybe that's because of history and generations, etc. But at some point you would hope that maybe people catch on. Research is always being taken place. Like, I feel like that desire to improve, if that's there in more people, then some of these things may also evolve over time.
Yeah, that was very well said. And you're right. The word is autonomy. And even though you say, parents are doing the best they can, I have experienced many parents that own up to their bad parenting,
right,
and use that once they've acknowledged that,
right,
and then it's almost like it gives them license to continue doing it. So I don't actually agree that every parent is doing the best thing. I have some ridiculous parent anecdotes that I cannot share and never do, but I've just seen some absurd behavior. And how it manifests in the kids,
right,
is astounding. They become so brittle.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, their ego and this cover up. They're trying to cover up, and they really, really struggle. So even though there are many parents doing the best they can, there are also a decent percentage, I would guess, that really are not. And you could say, well, maybe they can't help themselves because this is the way they're brought, or they don't want their kids to hurt or suffer or struggle. It's like they don't want kids to struggle. All kids have got to struggle. It's part of bloody life. You have to struggle. You have to go through it, for goodness sake. And often the best voice to help a young person is not mom or dad. I mean, it may well be if the kid's got a great relationship with one or the other, fantastic. But very often it's not. Very often the issue is to do with the mum or dad, or if it's not the main cause, it's compounding the problem.
Yes. No, I see this with a lot of kids, even kids that I coach, and especially with kids from certain ethnic backgrounds. My own ethnic background, Pakistani, and some similar backgrounds, where the parents, in their minds, they're doing the best thing for their kid by pushing them academically, by pushing them to train excessively long hours and stuff. And the word that you use about brittleness, I've been seeing that more and more, where a lot of the youth now are actually arguably clinically depressed. I'm not making that statement. This is from some of the kids that I know. They're actually experiencing like a lot of anxiety and depression and things like that because of all of the pressure, and they're unable to actually have that honest conversation with their parents because of fear that they're going to disappoint their parents aren't going to understand, et cetera, et cetera. There's just so many layers. And even if I've tried speaking to some of the parents, but the parents don't get it because they're trying to protect their kids. They're saying, if I don't do this, this kid's not going to get into university because the grades aren't going to be good enough, their squash isn't going to be good enough, and then I have to look out for the kid. But it's such a catch-22 because the parent wants the child to succeed, but if they keep pushing them, they're not going to succeed. They might succeed in the short run, but in the long run, the kid doesn't have the skills to cope with life, and it's going to be disastrous over time, I feel.
Well, it can, and it manifests itself in other ways sooner than that. And the classic one, of course, is burnout.
Right. Right.
So, I get emails, not every week, but I get a couple a month where a kid is talking about he's training for, a 15-year-old, and he's training 4 hours a day. And I go, you're training 4 hours a day? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, give me a break. Some kids, training 3 times a day.
Yeah.
I did a camp down in Baltimore, and there was a 12-year-old kid there, and the camp was long enough. Long 8:30, 8:45 start, 5 o'clock finish, with lots of breaks and changing it up and so on. And the kids hanging around at the end of the camp. And I said, well, what are you hanging around for? It's time to go home and have a bite to eat, watch a movie, and get to bed. He said, no, I've got a lesson. I said, you got a lesson?
Oh my God.
Are you kidding me, son? Anyway, so it was tough for me to hold it in with the mum. The mum was there, and hold it in, I didn't. But that's the sort of thing. I mean, one of the things we look for when we're recruiting, top of our list when we're recruiting is for burnout. And we don't recruit. We don't recruit a kid if we see burnout. Now, sometimes you see the first, there's a top, I won't say her name because we're recruiting this top lassie in America for 23, and she did a couple of camps with me this summer. Great kid, great player, and you could just see the first signs of burnout. And I said, hey, come on, I don't know what's going on. So we had a short chat, and I'm chatting to her now, but just really needed to back up, because when burnout sets in, it will, even though they think they can take a break and it's gone, it actually comes back in double quick time the second time round, and so on, third, fourth. So that it's this, I tell the parents and the kids that you cannot assume whatever passion and enthusiasm you have now, you must not take it for granted. You have to look after it. It has to be nurtured, and it's nurtured in various ways. Good coaching, nice group, having fun, the social that goes around it, an intelligent program, that's leading towards setting goals, etc., etc. But one of the most obvious ones is you need to get away from the sport. You need breaks, and as you just said a few minutes ago, it's not more is better. What are you doing? Good quality. Comes first, and it's not the number of hours, but I would say that's probably the toughest message. That is the toughest message to get through to parents and student athletes alike.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's one point I want to make before I ask you another question. This piece of more is not better. I was reading a book the other day. I can't remember the name. I'll share it with you later if you're interested. But he was basically just saying that this more is better idea is this underlying belief of scarcity in the parents' minds. And a lot of the kids whose parents are saying this, if they're in their 40s and 50s and so on and so forth, they may have lived through challenging times in their own lives, or they've seen their parents really struggle from times maybe in the Depression and stuff like that. And because of that, I think a lot of these inner beliefs have been ingrained within them, and they haven't realized that the world has changed, and they're still operating from these underlying beliefs. And they haven't, like you and I talk always about self-awareness and reflection. And most people in the world, unfortunately, I think, do not consistently engage in reflection and are not that self-aware. And then these patterns just continue. And unfortunately, these same kids, and arguably the kids that you're talking to, potentially coming to Harvard and stuff, in many cases are probably coming from affluent families and coming from pretty comfortable situations in their lives. And this idea of scarcity almost shouldn't even exist if you think about it, compared to the generation that was coming from the Depression, where there literally wasn't food and shelter. And it's a shame and a travesty that it's actually still continuing to manifest itself today.
Yeah, that's a great point, by the way. I hadn't thought of that. That's their background struggles, and they're bringing it forwards. We talk about on the quality, on the quantity versus quality side. We're doing and when we're watching kids practice and at camps and clinics and so on, we're looking to see how far the kid is what we call in the drill versus doing the drill. And we talk about it in our program. So, we've only got, there's a mandatory 90 minutes on court session each day, each training day. And we want to squeeze, that's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
So we want to squeeze every ounce out of that. And some kids will do extra sessions. They might come early, they might stay late, they might come in the morning. That's fine. That's not mandatory, but the mandatory training is 90 minutes on court, and then the strength and conditioning stuff off the court on top of that. But 90 minutes is not a lot of time. So you want to squeeze what you can out of that. And always, we notice our guys when they're in the drill versus the doing, versus just going through, just checking a box. And of course, our sport very much lends itself to this quantity box.
Right.
If you think of how many tens and hundreds of thousands of balls young kids hit, it's amazing.
Right.
So what is the level of concentration on a per shot basis?
Right.
It's amazing the care that a kid will give maybe to a drop shot practice, because they only hit a fraction of the number of drops. Went into the drives,
right,
and they can be all over the place mentally.
Right.
They're not in it until they learn how to be right in the drill and look at each ball that they strike,
right,
and hit and strike it with care and attention and deliberation, and then have the voice in the head do this immediate evaluation and send the right instruction to help hit the next ball better. But because our sport doesn't lend itself to that, because of these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of balls,
right,
it's easy to have that concentration go down.
Right.
And now they're just checking these boxes. And it's a very important thing for all coaches to get this quantity up.
Right.
Just because we're not like golf where you're hitting, I don't know how many balls they hit in a practice session, but of course it's only, and it can only be because it takes time to keep the ball up and get ready. But that's not my point. But think of the care and attention that's taken to a golf swing at the driving range to learn and develop. And what's that level of concentration versus the average kid delivering a drive when they're practicing their backhands,
Right. So how, out of curiosity, because it's something that when I was even 5-6 years ago, I didn't have that same degree of concentration and purpose and intention behind every shot that I was hitting. Now I find myself thinking about every shot that I'm hitting. I'm talking about myself as a player right now.
Yeah.
I have that attention, and I have to reflect on this because I don't know how that transition came about, but I'm wondering, how do you consciously try to train that skill into your student athletes right now? And I'm asking because I'm trying to do certain things with some of the kids that I coach to help them raise their awareness and put that conscious attention to detail. But I find I don't want to be interrupting them too frequently when they're doing something, when I see that they're not focused. But at the same time, you don't want to let them go too far in an unfocused, lack of concentrated form. So I'm wondering how you find that balance, or how do you actually teach that skill?
Right. That's a big question. So first of all, I just got to put this up front, and is that it's important that to recognize whether it is a swing, what I would call a swing-based drill versus a target-based drill.
Okay.
And sometimes those things get confused. So if you're trying to change a swing, make a change, I'm not talking about a small adjustment, but if you're trying to change a swing, so something big-ish, and the player is super aware of just hitting the ball close to the side wall if they're, say, hitting their drives, and they want the ball deep and tight. They may not be free enough to make the adjustment on a swing base. So I equate it to, like, it's like going to the driving range. If you go to the driving range and you're a good golfer, you're going to be taking, a flag stick out, and you say, okay, this is my target. I'm practicing my 7 irons, whatever it is, right? But for the most part, people go to the driving range actually to improve their swing, because they want to hit the ball better.
Right.
It's a swing-based practice. Then I want the head to be, I don't care so much about the targets are much bigger. They're much freer to hit. I'm going to do some simple drills, and I want head and the focus and the feedback to be on how does it feel. Right. And good coaches know that when it looks good, it feels good.
Right.
But often they can't. Yeah, and it sounds good. It sounds good. If there's depth, if the line's through the ball will sound heavier.
Yeah.
But you may not be hitting those heavier shots right off the bat.
Of course.
So I might do drills with kids. So the first thing I want them to do, I want them to give themselves time. So, so I might set a drill up with me feeding or with a ball machine. So there's lots of time and there's lots of rhythm. If they're doing solo, I might not care too much. I won't care about power, and I won't care too much about if it bounces once or twice if it's coming off the back wall. So time allows them to send the right instruction, move the feet, get set up, and then I want the swing to look a certain way, to look easy and free, and then it feels easy and free.
Yeah.
So assuming the player has a reasonable swing, and they might now just be sending tiny instructions for adjustments, then you want the concentration high. What I absolutely don't want is the drill to go on and on and on.
Right.
So I'm going to use numbers, or I'm going to use the clock.
Right.
So we use fairly big targets to start with. I don't use the really small targets. The guys they play the shoe game. We put little targets down because they do it for fun. But I'm talking about when I'm coaching, I use a biggish target.
Right.
And they'll probably hit 20 balls at a time.
Yeah.
There might be someone coaching them apart from myself, and then they might hit another 20, and then they might switch, because I want the person who's coaching to get a bit of insight. This is not something I'm doing every day in their pairs.
Right.
And then they might, if they're doing rotating drives, they might hit a target number of 15 or 20 into a design target. I might make the target smaller and say, I want you to hit 20, but you've got to hit them in groups of 5. Okay. So 5 means you've got to hit 5 in the target. So if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th one's out, you go back to 0.
Right.
But once you get 5, you got 5 in your pocket, and now you're going 6 to 10. You get to 9, you hit out on 10th, you go back to 6.
Right.
You go back to your 5, and you got to start at 6. So again, what I'm doing is playing with these levels of concentration.
Right.
And then we play target games, which are really quite difficult and frustrating to start with, whereby, let's say you start a rotating drive drills. Let's say I'm doing this with you.
Right.
After we keep driving until each of us has hit consecutively 1 shot in the target.
Okay.
So if I'm hitting mine in the target, you're hitting out. We keep rotating until you've hit 1 and I've hit 1. Now it's game on.
Okay.
Now it's game on. The first person that hits out of the target has lost the rally. Score a point.
Interesting.
Now you've got to be careful how big your targets are. Our targets in that game are the length of a racket. So it's a racket length width from the sidewall. It's a very generous target, but the rallies are still not that long. Now, if I bring in the volley, and you can only score when it bounces in the target. If you're in front of me and you volley, I can't volley behind you. You can only volley from in front. You can score and I can't. If you volley and it outside it, we switch on the next shot. If your ball lands in the target, I've got to hit it as tight as I can to stop you volleying. So whatever it is, these little progressions have high degrees of concentration.
Right. Right.
So I'm creating the concentration there. Now, on the practice and the warm-up before then, on their solo practice or their rotating drives, we are now giving them feedback, or they're giving themselves feedback on how they want to hit the ball, how they want to lay it down, how they want to make it die in the corner if they're over the ball. What's their feet doing? What's the preparation? Does the swing too big or so? So we're making these small adjustments as to how to hit the ball better. And then, of course, they'll stay with that for a period, trying to work things out before we go to the drills and condition games that are raising the concentration. Now, when I say you put a number on it, the number, say 20 shots or drives for 45 or 60 seconds, it might be 90 seconds, 2 minutes, is to help those that need a number and a clock. A guy like we're just talking about Victor, a Victor or a Gina Kennedy, they don't need that. They can be on the court and they might hit 100 drives, but when you walk past, you know that their head is in the drill, and they are making micro adjustments as they talk to themselves. So they may not need this assistance. But I'm talking about if we're coaching one team, I can't assume that everyone's got that level of concentration. So I write the program out and we'll say, okay, this is the program here. And the program is designed for the average person or those that need the help with their focus and concentration. All right.
Got it.
Long answer. Sorry about that.
No, that was very thorough. And the thing is, it was very practical, because now, you gave me some suggestions and drills that I can go and work on with some of the juniors, and anyone else who's watching, they have some ideas about how to progress things through. And that's one of the things I feel that a lot of people miss, is that, whatever Ali Farag is doing is not what a club player needs to be doing. There is a progression that leads to that. And a lot of people look at pros and they say, oh, the pro's doing this, well, I need to do this. And that goes for the technical, tactical, mental side of the sport. It also goes for the physical side and conditioning and training. And now I'll rant for a second. One of the things that I dislike so much about social media, I think they're phenomenal things about social media, but one thing I dislike is that you get all these videos of athletes from different sports and they're showing their training and this and that. Well, when the average person goes and tries that, they don't have the 5, 10, 15, 20 years that athlete has had leading up to it. And then it leads to injuries, and then it could lead to burnout and like all sorts of things, right? Like I remember there was an article about Mohammed Shorbagi's weekly training plan once I think it was on the squash site website. And it shows I was training twice a day, 6 days a week, 1 day light, medium, etc. But if the average person goes and follows that, it's a recipe for disaster for that person. And I don't think people realize that. So in your answer, where you gave the progression, is actually very, very helpful, because it shows people how to scale up based on their current standard. So thank you for that.
Yeah, just a couple of points there. Is that, again, it comes back to that our sport lends itself to this quantity, especially because you've got a wall and you don't need a practice partner. You just got a wall is your practice partner. But of course, the term, I didn't create this term, but I liked it when I first heard it many, many years ago, was that practice makes perfect. Is just not a true statement, of course. It's practice makes permanent. So practice makes permanent. So you got a one swing and you practice it 10,000 times, you're going to have a permanently wonky swing. So this is more is better. We were just dealing, I won't say his name, but one of our guys came back and was talking about his training back home through the summer. And he was going down the court. The conversation started about, am I going to graduate and get a job, or am I going to graduate and give a couple of years on the tour?
Okay.
And then the conversation led to how he felt about squash in the last 3 months, with no classes. He trained 3 times a day because everyone else was training 3 times a day.
Wow.
And he had the first signs of burnout, and it absolutely was not for him. It's for most people, but we can get sucked in. Again, it's the quantity box. We get sucked in.
Right.
Oh, this is what the top guys are doing. This is what I need to do. And you have, the 10,000 hour book was just, proven that the author didn't understand what the theory or the studies that were done by the original professor. So everything gets misinterpreted and say, oh yeah, more and more and more. Right. Well, no.
Yeah. And the truth is, like, it's actually easier to do more than it is, because you can easily go and hit 1,000 balls because you're just hitting the ball, but it's far more challenging to focus. So, our tendency is to go the easy route, and it makes us feel good because we can tell ourselves now, hey, I just practiced for 2 hours and I hit 500 backhands, 500 forehands. I should be getting better. But it's far harder to be aware of whether, hey, did I do that correctly or incorrectly? Was I working on cutting the ball or hitting flat or mixing up the pace or whatever it is that you need to work on? It's just so much easier to be on autopilot. And that I'm going to go down another rabbit hole with autopilot, so I'm going to avoid that.
I might go with you. So let's move on.
We'll spare people. So I know before you were telling me about one of the top traits that you look for when you're recruiting student athletes is burnout. Are there, other than burnout, what are the next couple of character traits? You mentioned character traits, and I think one of them is maybe the desire to improve / the ability to listen to someone or seek feedback. Maybe that's one of them, but are there like one or two others that you look for?
Well, the biggest one, on the plus side is just their love of the sport.
Yeah.
Like, you just, if you're not feeling the love of sport, which is probably crossing over into burnout if they're jaded.
Yes.
But interesting, when we talk to recruits, tell me about your game. Right. What are your strengths? And what are your weaknesses? And how do you think you're playing? And where do you think you'll be in a year's time? And so on. It's amazing the lack of insight that comes back. Every now and again, we get an athlete that's really thought about it. Right. And is very, very clear. But sometimes we get this much. So their insights into the game, their passion of the game. The guys that are really passionate, they know all the top players. They watch the matches. They watch a lot of squash. Right. So I'd say that their passion for the game, then their maturity level, which again to do with coachability. So as we're getting to know the player through Zoom calls, right, in times when we don't have a pandemic, they're with us. We watch them at tournaments. You can tell a lot from a tournament. Kids always think they can hide it, but they can't hide it. They just can't hide stuff for very long. So how they handle themselves on the court, but how they interact with people. Right. Off the court, how they interact with their coach, with their parents. Right. You can spot burnout. You can spot burnout a mile away. You cannot fake that. You can hide it for a little bit. A kid might see a college coach up in the gallery and suddenly start playing better. I mean, what is that a sign of? That's a clap. What does that mean? What is that telling the coach? Oh, you saw me in the stands, right, and then you started concentrating and playing better. Right. You can tell by their eyeball control, lack of, where they're at. And of course, but the big thing here is whether they're a fit. So all those things being said is whether they are, obviously they've got to be good enough to help the program, to help the team. We want to be, whatever the team is, wherever they are, they're competitive in their division. Yeah. So they're trying to recruit. It doesn't matter whether you're in the top division, the third division, or whatever. You want to be competitive in your division and around the schools. There's always a few schools you want to desperately be. Right. So the kids got to be a fit with the program. That's when we rely on the upperclassmen, the captains, on their visits. If they can't, then it's a lot of Zooms and chats. And they try. We try and get a sense. The upperclassmen try and get a sense of whether they're a good fit with the team. So we want them to be a fit for us, a fit for the program. And some young people don't understand. They don't understand the fact that we're all contributing because we're an individual sport.
Right.
So a lot of kids feel, well, it's an individual sport, so whatever I do, or if I slack off or I do whatever, it's only affecting me. So they don't understand what the word synergy means. So we give them a definition of the word synergy.
Okay.
We talk about the fact that everyone is contributing, and it's not an option to be a neutral. You either contribute or you steal. And we do not allow any energy thieves in our program. Okay. And in fact, if some of our guys that we've recruited, if they become neutrals, then we have a lot of conversations. They can take a break. And if we have to hold the door open to help them make the right decision for themselves and for the program, then we're not scared of doing that. And again, we're not talking about good student athlete or bad student athlete. We're just talking about, where are you in your life with your sport?
Right.
Do you love it enough? Do you have the character skills? Do you recognize that we're playing as a team,
right,
and that you have a role on this team, and we're in this together, and we spend all these hours together over 4 years? We better enjoy it.
Yes.
If you don't get that, then maybe this program isn't for you.
Absolutely. Well, I think everything you said also applies to anyone in their lives, regardless of what they're doing, because I experienced exactly what you're saying when I was in my previous career in the finance field, where I didn't feel the passion. I wasn't contributing to the team as effectively as I could have with my natural potential that I'm aware of, and all of the other things you talked about right now. And then it took many, many years of floundering and needing to go back and forth, because it was a very big decision. But the final decision was to make that exit. And as soon as I have now, over the last 5 years, been applying myself to the thing that I am passionate about, to the thing that I do want to add value to and serve, etc., it's just a different beast now, right? Like, you're playing a different game because you're actually there, because you actually want to be there and you enjoy doing what you're doing. And I'm going to go down another rabbit hole. And I know we've been talking for a long time, so I want to be respectful of your time, Mike. Before either of us delve on into another rant, let's what do you think? Are you good calling it a day here? Is there anything else you want to say? Any last words?
No, I'm good.
You're good.
Whatever,
okay.
I'd forgotten. I thought you're right. It's been over an hour. I thought we started at 9:30, but we didn't. Think how quickly that went.
See, because both of us were enjoying that. And I think, honestly, I feel like you shared a ton of valuable stuff that if people listen to this and maybe even listen to it a second time, they're going to extract a lot of valuable information that they can get. And I truly feel that I think both the parents and the athletes could gain a lot from this, because there's some things that parents need to hear that they don't want to hear, that you and I talked about. And there's some things that athletes, anyone who's aspiring to, whether it's Harvard or going to any other school or just generally in life, there are a lot of valuable takeaways, I think, that can bring people joy and pleasure, as opposed to, God forbid, having regret later in their lives that they didn't make a decision that was more in line with their intuition, for example. Awesome, Mike.
100%.
Well, if you're up for it, maybe we'll have you on another time. I know you're about to get slammed with work, so I'm not going to hold you accountable, but we'll see what happens.
All right. That was great. It was good talking to you, and let's do this again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike.
All right, my friend.
And
okay.
Thank you.